I think your passport's under the vending machine, Parker Lane said, crouching down beside the noisy airport kiosk, his 5-year-old son Ben clinging to his leg like a koala. The woman standing in front of him turned sharply, her face pale and eyes wide. What? You said you lost it, right? I saw something slide under there when you dropped your bag. She knelt beside him immediately. Oh my God. Are you serious? Ben let go of Parker and stepped back to watch. Is it shiny? Parker smiled. It had one of those gold eagles on the front. The woman's fingers reached under the vending machine. A few seconds later, she pulled out a slightly dusty navy blue passport and let out a breathless laugh. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. You just saved my life. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed, hair a little messy from rushing. Parker guessed she'd been running to catch a flight. Her eyes were bright, grateful, and for a second, he forgot they were in a crowded terminal full of crying babies and rolling suitcases. I'm Darcy Preston, she said, standing up and brushing off her knees. Thank you, Parker. This is my son, Ben. Ben gave a little wave. Hi. We were gonna get gum. Darcy bent down and gave him a smile. Nice to meet you, Ben. Your dad just saved me from missing my flight to Paris. Parker raised an eyebrow. Paris, huh? Sounds fancy. It's work, she said with a half laugh, glancing at her watch. Then her eyes widened. And if I don't run right now, I'm going to miss it anyway. Thank you again. Seriously. She started to turn, then looked back. Wait, can I buy you a coffee or something? As a thank you. Parker shook his head. Don't worry about it. Darcy hesitated. Are you sure? He shrugged. Just glad you found it. She stared at him for a second longer, as if trying to memorize his face. Then she smiled, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. Ben tugged his sleeve. She was pretty. Parker laughed. Yeah, she was. 2 weeks later, Parker was back at the same airport, this time picking up a friend of his sister's. He was juggling Ben's backpack, a worn lunchbox, and a half-eaten banana when someone called his name. Parker. He turned, and there she was. Darcy. No suitcase this time, just a sleek designer purse slung over her shoulder and a pair of sunglasses in her hand. You're the guy who found my passport, she said, smiling like it had only been yesterday. He stared. Darcy, what are you doing here? My return flight landed early, and I saw you again, which feels like, I don't know, fate. Ben gave her a grin. You remember us. I do, she said, crouching down. How was the gum? Parker chuckled, still chewing it. Well, she said, standing up, I owe you that coffee. And I'm finally not running through terminals like a lunatic. Parker hesitated. He had been with him, and the last thing he wanted was to drag a kid into a grown-up thing. But Darcy seemed genuine, and Ben was already reaching into her bag to investigate her sunglasses. All right, Parker said, but only if it's quick. They ended up in a quiet cafe tucked between terminals. Ben colored with crayons the waitress gave him while Parker and Darcy sat across from each other, sipping coffee. So what do you do? She asked. He looked down at his cup. I'm a mechanic. Mostly freelance stuff. I pick up work when I can. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. And Ben's mom. Parker glanced at Ben, who was humming to himself, oblivious. She left when he was 2. Darcy's expression softened. I'm sorry. It's all right. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. She nodded. You're a good dad. Parker shrugged. I try. Darcy stirred her coffee. Most men would have walked right by me at that vending machine. You know, you didn't even hesitate. He gave a half smile. You looked like you were about to cry. I couldn't ignore that. She tilted her head, studying him. Do you always help strangers in airports? Only the ones going to Paris. She laughed. Over the next few weeks, Darcy kept showing up. She called it coincidence, at first dropping by the garage where Parker worked, claiming she was in the area. Then it was coffee again. Then lunch. Then a picnic with Ben at the park. And Parker couldn't lie, he liked having her around. She was funny, sharp, and never looked at him like he was less than just because he didn't wear a suit. She listened. She laughed at his dumb jokes. She brought Ben little toys from her travels. But something about her didn't add up. She never talked about her job. Her car was too new, her phone too sleek, her clothes too tailored. She paid for everything without blinking, and once, when Parker insisted on covering the bill, she let him. But it took 3 tries before the waitress accepted his beat-up card. He started to wonder. But Darcy never bragged. She never flashed anything. And when she was with Ben, she was just a woman kicking a soccer ball in heels, laughing when she missed. One evening, after they dropped Ben off at Parker's sister's place so they could grab dinner alone for the first time, Darcy leaned against his truck and said quietly, "I want to tell you something." He looked up. "All right." She hesitated. "I wasn't in Paris for work. I was there for a board meeting. I'm the CEO of my family's company, Preston Global. It's a lot. I never know how to bring it up." Parker blinked. "Wait, Preston Global? Like the logistics empire?" She nodded. "That's me." He stared at her. "You're a millionaire." "Technically, yes. You said you were working." "I was. Just not in the way you thought." Parker rubbed the back of his neck. "So you've been slumming it with a broke auto mechanic and his 5-year-old. Darcy stepped closer. "I've been spending time with a man who treats people better than anyone I've ever met. A man who didn't ask for anything when he helped me. A man who makes me laugh and makes his kid feel safe and loved every single day." He looked at her, still stunned. She touched his hand. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to like me for me. Not the money. Not the name. Just me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You should have led with the fact that you're great at soccer in heels." She laughed, a little breathless. "Is that a yes to dinner?" He smiled. "It's a yes to a lot of things." And when they walked into the restaurant together, her in a navy dress, him in his best flannel, they didn't look like a millionaire and a broke dad. They looked like two people falling for each other. Fast. Darcy hadn't planned on staying in town longer than a week after Paris. But now it was 3 weeks later, and she still hadn't booked her return flight to New York. She told herself she was working remotely. Her assistant forwarded the important calls. Her board meetings were virtual anyway, but if she was being honest, she wasn't staying for convenience. She was staying because of Parker. Every time she saw him, something inside her settled. Conversations with him weren't performances. She didn't have to impress him, didn't have to outrun a legacy. With Parker, she was just Darcy. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. They were sitting in the back of his truck, watching Ben chase fireflies in a wide, open field behind Parker's sister's house. The sky was streaked orange and lavender, the kind of sky that made silence feel full instead of empty. Darcy kicked off her shoes and folded her legs beneath her. "You ever think about leaving?" Parker tilted his head. "You mean the town?" "Yeah. Starting over somewhere else." He glanced toward the horizon. "I used to, but I've got roots here. My sister helps with Ben. I've got clients who trust me. And Ben's school is good. I don't need much." Darcy watched him quietly. "You ever want more?" He turned to her then, eyes steady. "More doesn't always mean better." She didn't respond at first. Then, with a dry laugh, said, "That sounds like something a man who's never been trapped in a glass conference room for 6 hours would say." Parker smiled faintly. "That bad? I once had to sit through a 40-page presentation about optimizing printer ink usage. That's a crime. I think I blacked out halfway through slide 20. He chuckled, then looked back out at the field. "So why do you do it?" Darcy hesitated. "Because it's what I was raised for. My grandfather built the company from nothing. My father expanded it. And I was the only one in the family who didn't run from the responsibility. You ever wish you had?" "All the time." Ben ran up to them, holding a mason jar filled with flickering light. "I caught 12. Parker leaned forward. "You counted?" Ben nodded solemnly. "I named them." Darcy laughed softly. "Let's hope they don't mind sharing." Parker helped Ben set the jar on the truck bed. "Don't keep them long, but they've got places to be." "Just 5 more minutes," Ben said, curling up beside him. Darcy watched the two of them, her chest tightening. She wasn't used to stillness. Her world spun fast: stock values, acquisition deals, charity galas where everyone smiled too hard. But this quiet moment in a field with fireflies felt more real than any of it. Later that night, when Parker dropped her off at the short-term rental she'd been using, she lingered beside the truck. "You know," she said, "I think this might be the longest I've gone without wearing heels." Parker leaned against the door. "You seem to be surviving." "I'm adapting." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You could stay longer." Darcy's breath caught. "You mean?" "Here. Why not? You don't seem in a rush to go back." She hesitated. "I'd need a reason." He stepped closer, voice low. "Maybe I could be one." Darcy's heart thudded against her ribs. "That's dangerous." "Probably. Complicated." "Definitely." But she didn't step away. And when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative. It was certain, like he'd already made up his mind. She didn't sleep much after that. Not because she was worried or scared, but because her mind wouldn't stop spinning. She dated men before, powerful ones, polished ones, men who wore Rolexes and had private chefs. But none of them had looked at her like Parker did, like she was something rare. Not because of her last name, not because of her net worth, just because she was her. That thought terrified her more than any boardroom ever had. The next morning, Darcy called her assistant and canceled her flight back to New York. She didn't offer an explanation, just said she needed more time. The following week passed in a blur. She and Parker started spending nearly every evening together, sometimes with Ben, sometimes just the two of them. They went to a drive-in movie, got caught in a summer storm walking back from dinner, and once stayed up until 2 in the morning on Parker's porch talking about nothing and everything. But not everything was perfect. One evening, Darcy arrived at Parker's garage earlier than usual. She found him under the hood of an old truck, grease streaked across his forearm. A tall man in a blazer was pacing near the entrance, clearly irritated. "I told you," Parker said, wiping his hands, "it's going to take at least another day. I'm not rushing a fix just because you overcommit on your weekend plans. I'm paying you, aren't I?" The man snapped. "And I'm not compromising someone's brakes because you want to impress your golf buddies." Darcy stepped inside before the man could respond. "Is there a problem?" Both men turned. The blazer guy saw her and straightened. "Do you work here?" "No," she said coolly. "But I do run a global logistics firm, so I'm familiar with deadlines and liability. If Parker says it's not ready, it's not ready." The man blinked, uncertain. "Well, I guess I'll come back tomorrow." He left without another word. Parker stared at her. "You didn't have to do that." Darcy shrugged. He was being a jerk. "You're not exactly low profile. Word gets around fast in this town." "I'm not hiding." Parker leaned against the car. "Aren't you?" She swallowed. "I stayed, didn't I?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, you did." But there was something unreadable in his eyes. The next few days felt different. Not colder exactly, but quieter. Like they were both thinking too hard and scared to say it out loud. Then came the benefit gala. Darcy hadn't planned on going, but the event supported a local children's literacy program, and she'd been donating anonymously to them for years. When the director called and asked if she'd attend, she said yes without thinking. It was held at the town's only country club, a grand old building with ivy-covered walls and chandeliers that hadn't been updated in decades. Darcy wore a deep navy gown, her hair swept back, her every movement practiced and polished. She didn't expect Parker to show. But he did. Not in a tux, just a dark button-down and black slacks. Clean-shaven, hair combed, and somehow more devastating than any man in a suit. He found her near the bar, alone between conversations. "You clean up all right," she said, voice soft. "Thought you might need backup." "I can handle myself." He looked around at the room full of cocktail dresses and cufflinks. "Yeah, I know." She studied him. "You're uncomfortable." He met her gaze. "Not because of the people. Because I don't know where I fit in your world." Darcy touched his hand, discreetly. "You fit wherever I am." They didn't kiss too public, too many eyes, but the look they shared said everything. After her final speech, as the applause faded and the crowd moved to the dance floor, Parker pulled her aside. "You're incredible up there," he said. "But I miss the woman who throws popcorn at me during movies." Darcy laughed. "I'm both." "I know." He hesitated. "I just hope there's room in your life for someone who isn't part of all this." She stepped closer. "There's not just room, Parker. There's a space that only you can fill." And when he kissed her, this time in front of everyone, no one dared interrupt. Not even the man in the blazer, who was now stuck behind the dessert table, watching with wide eyes. Darcy didn't care. Because for once, she wasn't performing. She was choosing. And she was choosing him. Parker stepped into the dimly lit mechanic bay the following Monday morning, the scent of metal and motor oil grounding him in the normalcy he suddenly wasn't sure he belonged to anymore. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and the silence pressed harder than usual. Ben was at Parker's sister's for the day, and though that wasn't new, the quiet now carried a weight he couldn't shake. Saturday night at the gala had changed something. Not just between him and Darcy, but inside him. The way she looked at him after her speech, like he was the only man in the world, had felt like a dream. But now, in the daylight, the old doubts crept back in. He didn't belong in her world. Not really. Not when his boots left oil prints and his biggest investment was a second-hand socket set. A deep voice cut through the stillness. So you're the guy who kissed the Preston heiress in front of 200 people. Parker turned to see Marcus Holcomb, a local dealership owner and longtime client, leaning against the entrance with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Parker grabbed a rag and wiped his hands. Didn't think you were the type to go to charity galas. I wasn't. But my wife was. She came home buzzing about some small-town knight who swept Darcy Preston off her stilettos. You here for your truck? Marcus stepped further inside. Actually, I came to offer you a deal. Parker raised an eyebrow. A deal? You're dating a Preston now. That kind of visibility can be good for both of us. I've got 2 garages north of town. They've been underperforming. You've got a reputation for honest work. I've got the capital. We partner up, expand, maybe even franchise. Parker stared at him. You think I'm suddenly bankable because of who I'm seeing? Marcus shrugged, unapologetic. I think you've got potential. And the Preston name opens doors. You play this right, you'll never turn a wrench again unless you want to. Parker set down the rag. I appreciate the offer. But I'm not interested in using Darcy's name to get ahead. This isn't about using anyone. It's about momentum. You've got some. Don't waste it. Parker was quiet. Then, I'll think about it. After Marcus left, Parker leaned against the workbench, the corners of his mind restless. He didn't want Darcy's money. He didn't want anyone's pity opportunity. But he couldn't ignore the voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, he'd been living too small for too long. That evening, Darcy met him at a local bookstore that doubled as a cafe. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair pinned back loosely. It was the most casual he'd ever seen her, and it made his stomach tighten. I needed somewhere quiet, she said, setting her purse down and sliding into the booth. You okay? She hesitated. I had a call with the board this morning. They want me back in New York. There's a trade summit next week, and they're panicking about my absence. You going? I said no. Parker's brow lifted. That's simple. It wasn't. She picked at the edge of a napkin. But I made a choice. I've spent half my life putting that company before everything else. I'm not doing that anymore. He reached across the table, wrapping his fingers gently around hers. I don't want you to give up anything for me. I'm not giving up. I'm changing direction. Parker hesitated. Marcus Holcomb came by today. Darcy looked up, surprised. Why? He offered me a business deal. Said dating you makes me more visible. Her expression hardened. That's not a compliment. That's leverage. I know. I didn't say yes. But you're thinking about it. He didn't deny it. Darcy leaned back, studying him. Do you want more, Parker? Not because of me. Because of you. I don't know. I've always done what I had to do. Never had room to think about what I wanted. Well, maybe it's time you do. He nodded slowly. You ever get tired of people assuming they know who you are? All the time. He exhaled. Now I know how that feels. Darcy squeezed his hand. Then let's stop letting them decide. They left the bookstore after dark, the sidewalks quiet and the air cool. Parker walked her to her car, his fingers brushing hers as they crossed the street. Come with me tomorrow, Darcy said suddenly. He looked at her. Where? There's a property I've been eyeing just outside of town. A small ranch house with a big barn out back. I was thinking of buying it. For what? For staying. For building something different. Maybe even, she paused, measuring her words for us. Parker's breath caught. You're serious. I don't do things halfway. They stood in front of her car, the silence stretching between them. I'll come, he said. The next morning, they drove out together. The property sat on a quiet stretch of land, surrounded by rolling hills and clusters of tall pines. The house was modest, but solid. The barn behind it was weather-worn, but sturdy. There were wildflowers growing along the fence line. Darcy stepped out of the SUV and turned in a slow circle. It's not a penthouse, but I like it. Parker stood beside her, arms folded. It's peaceful. I could see Ben running through that field. He smiled. He'd love it. And I could see you setting up a proper workshop in that barn. He looked at her. You want to live here? I want to live somewhere that feels like mine. Not inherited. Not expected. Just mine. They walked the perimeter, inspecting the fence posts, peeking inside the barn, talking about how they might fix it up. Later, they sat on the tailgate of Darcy's SUV, sipping bottled lemonade from a cooler she'd packed. I've never done this before, she admitted. Bought land? No. Dreamed like this. With someone else. Parker looked at her, his voice low. Neither have I. She leaned against his shoulder. That's what makes it scary. But also worth it. They didn't talk much on the drive back. But the silence was warm now, filled with possibility. That night, Ben came home from his aunt's with glitter in his hair and a drawing crumpled in his fist. He showed it to both of them, a house with a big red barn and 3 stick figures holding hands. "Is that us?" Parker asked. Ben nodded. "You, me, and Miss Darcy." Darcy smiled and ran a hand through his hair. "We look pretty happy." "We are," Ben said confidently, then skipped off toward the living room. Parker and Darcy watched him go, their hands brushing. "I want this," Parker said quietly. "Not the business deal. Not any of that. Just this." Darcy looked up at him. "Then let's build it. Together." He pulled her close. "What do we tell people?" "Whatever we want," she whispered. "They've had their turn writing our stories. Now it's ours." And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like something to chase, it felt like something they were already holding. Parker stood beside the barn, the morning sun streaming over the dew-drenched grass, casting long shadows across the field. He had a toolbox open on the ground, its contents neatly arranged, and a fresh plank of cedar propped against the weathered barn door. The scent of sawdust and damp earth filled the air. Darcy stepped out of the house, her boots crunching softly against the gravel path. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, and she wore a flannel shirt that didn't belong to her. It was Parker's, and far too big for her, the sleeves rolled up clumsily. She looked down at the barn, then back at him. "You've been out here since sunrise." He placed the drill down and stretched his arms. The door was hanging off the hinges. "Figured I'd start fixing it before Ben wakes up." She walked closer and leaned against the fence. "You're making it look like something out of a magazine. I'm trying to make it safer. That beam in the loft's cracked. I don't want it collapsing if Ben decides to turn the place into a pirate fort." Darcy chuckled softly, then glanced at the house behind them. "He's still asleep. Your sister texted she's heading over with breakfast." Parker wiped his hands on a rag and looked at the sky. "Weather's holding. I might finish the roof today." Darcy hesitated, then stepped closer. "I had a call this morning. From the foundation. The children's literacy one? They want me to join the advisory board. Formal capacity. It's local, small scale, completely separate from Preston Global." He set the rag down. "You thinking about it?" "I already said yes." He studied her face. "You okay with that?" "I'm more than okay. I'm excited. I haven't felt that in a long time." Parker leaned against the fence beside her. "You're really staying then?" She nodded. "I wanted to build a life. Not just visit." Before he could respond, a car pulled into the driveway, and his sister stepped out holding a tray of foil-covered containers. Ben, wide awake and barefoot, ran out behind her, his pajama pants flapping at the ankles. "Uncle Parker, Aunt Darcy," he shouted, waving a piece of toast in one hand. Parker raised an eyebrow. "Aunt." Darcy turned toward him, surprised. "That's new." Ben reached them, grinning. "Mom says you're like family now." Darcy knelt in front of him. "You okay with that?" He nodded, then leaned close and whispered, "I drew you a picture of the barn. I made the roof gold." Parker laughed. "That's ambitious, but—" Ben ran toward the porch, already yelling about syrup. Parker turned to Darcy. "Gold, huh?" She smiled. "He dreams big." Later that week, they signed the paperwork for the property. Darcy had insisted on splitting the purchase evenly, and Parker had reluctantly agreed after a long late-night conversation where she pointed out he'd already invested sweat and hours into the place. Afterwards, they stood alone in the kitchen, the keys on the counter between them. "So," she said, picking them up, "what now?" "Now we make it feel like home." They started with the barn. Parker sanded down the beams and replaced the cracked loft support while Ben painted the inside walls with sweeping strokes of blue and green. Darcy worked on the house itself, repainting the trim, replacing the old curtains, and planting a small herb garden near the porch. She didn't tell anyone in New York what she was doing. She didn't need to. One afternoon, as Parker was hauling lumber from the truck, he found Darcy crouched under the porch with a flashlight and a screwdriver. "What are you doing?" "Fixing the screen door's spring. It keeps slamming." He leaned on the railing, watching her. "You're crawling under porches now?" "I like solving problems." "You're good at it." She emerged with dirty hands and a triumphant expression. "It won't slam again." That night, Parker cooked on the back patio grilled chicken, corn, and biscuits that turned out slightly burnt. Darcy brought out homemade lemonade, and they ate at a table Ben had decorated with paper flowers. The three of them sat together under string lights Parker had hung between the posts. Darcy leaned back in her chair. "I don't think I've ever felt this settled." Parker reached for her hand. Feels like we found something we didn't know we were missing. She looked around the yard, then at him. And to think it all started with a lost passport and a vending machine. He grinned. You look like you were about to cry. I was. I'd just come from a hotel where the concierge called me ma'am in a tone that made me feel like I was 70. I was jet-lagged, underfed, and clinging to my last nerve. You dropped your bag like the world was ending. It felt like it. And now, she looked at him, her expression open and calm. Now the world feels a lot quieter. In a good way. The following weekend, Darcy hosted a small gathering. Just neighbors, a few friends from town, some of the volunteers from the Literacy Foundation. She wanted people to see her differently, not as the heiress with a corner office in Manhattan, but as someone who chose this life deliberately. Parker grilled again, and Ben gave a tour of the barn to anyone who'd follow him. Darcy stood on the porch with a glass of sparkling water, watching as Parker chatted with Marcus. Yes, the same Marcus whose business proposal he'd turned down. Marcus shook his hand and laughed at something Parker said. When he walked away, Darcy approached him. You two seemed civil. We talked about engines and roof angles. No business. You sure? He offered to discount parts for the barn. I told him only if he lets Ben ride in his convertible again. She smiled. That's a fair deal. As the sun dipped below the hills, the guests lingered on the porch, sipping drinks and swapping stories. Darcy sat beside Parker on the swing, the wood creaking under them as they rocked gently. I was worried, she said, her voice low, that you'd feel like you were losing something by being with me. I was worried I'd never be enough. They both fell quiet for a moment. But then I realized, Parker said slowly, this isn't about money or names. It's about who we are when we're together. And I've never felt more myself than I do with you. Darcy turned to face him, her eyes bright. I've never felt more free. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She froze. I don't have a yacht, he said, or a villa in Italy. I can't fly you to Paris on a whim. But I can promise you a life filled with honesty, laughter, and a whole lot of love. Will you marry me? Darcy stared at him, speechless. Then she nodded. Yes. Yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a delicate gold band with a vintage diamond he'd found at a local estate sale. She looked at it, then at him. It's perfect. Ben burst out of the house at that moment, holding a cupcake in each hand. Are you getting married? Darcy laughed. We are. Can I wear a cape? Parker ruffled his hair. You can wear whatever you want, buddy. The wedding was small, held under the canopy of trees in their backyard. Darcy wore a simple cream dress, her hair down. Parker wore a navy shirt and a tie Ben picked out. The barn served as the backdrop, the wildflowers blooming along the fence line. They exchanged vows under a handmade arch, with Ben standing proudly between them. And when Parker kissed her, it wasn't rushed or showy. It was steady, certain, like every moment that had led to this had been worth it. Afterward, they danced on the grass while their guests clapped and cheered. Darcy rested her head on Parker's shoulder, her eyes closed. I never thought I'd find this, she whispered. You weren't looking in the right places, he said. I was looking in airports. He chuckled. Next time, try vending machines. She looked up at him. I found you. He kissed her again. And I'm not going anywhere. They stood there as the music played, a millionaire and a mechanic, a woman who had everything and a man who gave her something she'd never had before, home. And in that moment, nothing else in the world mattered. The scent of cinnamon and wood polish hung in the air as Parker stepped through the front door, brushing a few dried leaves from his jacket. Darcy was in the living room, barefoot on a ladder, hanging the last of the framed photos along the wall. Her hair was twisted up in a loose bun, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and she was humming softly to herself. He set the bag of groceries down and leaned against the doorway, watching her adjust the frame by a fraction of an inch. Pretty sure you've moved that one 5 times, he said. She glanced down, smiling. And it's finally where I want it. He walked over and looked at the wall. There were 7 black frames in total, each with a different photo bin with a missing front tooth holding up a fishing rod. Darcy kneeling in the garden with dirt on her nose, Parker and Ben asleep under the same blanket on the couch. Darcy laughing with flour in her hair from a failed baking attempt. Together, they formed a story. This house looks like us now, she said, stepping down from the ladder. He wrapped an arm around her waist. It feels like us. The door burst open and Ben barreled in, his backpack half unzipped, shoes in his hands. Uncle Parker. We made paper volcanoes. Mine exploded the highest. Darcy knelt down, brushing back his hair. That's amazing, bud. Did it get on your shirt? Ben held up a crumpled, slightly pink-stained polo. Only a little. Parker laughed. We'll toss it in the wash. Darcy stood and looked at Parker. You ready for tomorrow? He raised an eyebrow. You mean the fundraiser or the meeting with the architect? Both. And the contractor. They're all back to back. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm ready. Just hoping I don't forget my own name by the end of it. They had decided to convert the barn into a proper workshop with a small classroom at the back. Darcy's idea, inspired by a conversation she'd had with a volunteer who ran after-school programs. Parker would handle the mechanical side, training local teens and adults in basic automotive repair. Darcy would help fund the initiative and manage logistics, but insisted Parker be the face of it. People trust you, she had said. They listen when you talk. Now, standing beside her, he understood what she meant. Their lives were no longer just about each other, or even Ben. They were building something wider, something rooted in the community that had once felt too small and now felt exactly right. Later that night, after Ben had gone to sleep, his volcano safely tucked under the bed and his pillow stained faintly pink from the experiment, Darcy and Parker sat on the back porch. The crickets were loud, the stars were out, and the breeze carried the scent of sage from Darcy's herb garden. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't picked up my passport? She asked, her legs curled beneath her on the bench swing. I would have spent the rest of the day wondering if you'd cried behind the vending machine. She smiled. I would have made that flight. Gone back to New York. Kept building a life I didn't want. And I would have kept thinking I was stuck in one I couldn't change. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You changed everything for me. You made me want more. They sat in silence for a moment, the swing creaking softly beneath them. Darcy looked up. Let's get married here. Parker blinked. Here? Like in the yard. In the barn. After the renovations. Once the dust settles. Nothing fancy. Just us, Ben, and the people who matter. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that sounds right. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind: permits, blueprints, contractor delays, and one unexpected snowstorm in October that knocked out power for a day. But they worked through it. Together. Darcy handled calls with the city, negotiated with suppliers like she'd been doing it her whole life, and still managed to make time for pancake breakfast and bedtime stories. Parker oversaw the construction, taught Ben how to hammer nails without hitting his thumb, and kept the fire going through the cold nights. As the barn transformed, walls replaced, insulation added, windows widened, their vision took shape. The classroom area began to fill with donated tools and desks. The main space gleamed with polished floors and white counters. It was a place built to teach, to connect, to grow. By late November, the barn was finished, and on a crisp Saturday morning, they were married inside it. Parker wore a navy vest and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Darcy wore a simple ivory dress that flowed just above her ankles. Ben stood between them, holding the rings on a small wooden tray he had carved with Parker's help. There were no chandeliers, no champagne towers. Just twinkling lights strung across the beams and wildflowers tucked into mason jars. Friends from town sat on foldable chairs, bundled in scarves and coats, smiling through happy tears. I wasn't looking for you, Darcy said, her voice catching slightly as she read her vows. But you saw me anyway. Not the name, not the company, just me. And you made me feel like I was enough. For the first time, I know I am. Parker took her hands. You made me believe in something bigger than doing what I had to. You gave me a reason to want more. Not for the money, not for the title, just to be a better man. For you, for Ben, for us. They kissed to the sound of clapping and laughter, and Ben yelling, "You," loud enough to make everyone laugh harder. Afterward, they danced not a rehearsed waltz, but a slow, quiet sway beneath the rafters while the rest of the guests chatted and sipped apple cider. Darcy rested her head against his chest. We did it. Parker smiled, his hand on her waist. We're just getting started. The months that followed brought a rhythm neither of them had expected but both had craved. Mornings started with coffee on the porch and Ben's new habit of reading aloud from whatever chapter book he was on. Parker taught his first class in the workshop that January for students, two of them single moms who needed to learn how to maintain their own cars. Darcy launched a new program through the foundation, offering microgrants to help local businesses modernize operations. She did it quietly, without press releases or interviews. She didn't need a spotlight anymore. They let the seasons pass without rushing. They hosted neighborhood dinners, helped organize the spring fair, and once, under the stars, slow danced in the middle of their driveway while Ben watched through the window and pretended to gag. And every now and then, when the nights were particularly quiet and the fire crackled low, Parker would take out the worn passport that Darcy had left on the bookshelf now framed in a shadow box and remember the moment everything changed. Because in a world full of headlines and deadlines, of boardrooms and broken families, they had found something extraordinary. Not in the spotlight, not in the noise, but in the quiet, in each other. And there, they stayed. Together. Always.